The branded girl. The cold, metallic walls of Lab 47 hummed softly with the sound of machines. Bright white lights filled the long, narrow room where glass tubes lined the walls. Inside these tubes, different alien creatures floated in strange colored liquids, their bodies covered in wires. Some were awake, their eyes filled with silent pain. Others did not move at all. In the center of the lab, on a steel table, lay Zyra. Her body shivered against the cold surface, her violet skin covered in glowing blue symbols. These symbols were not natural. They were burned into her DNA, a permanent mark that told the world she was not a person. She was property. She tried to move, but thick metal cuffs held her wrists and ankles. She had been here for as long as she could remember, in this lab, in this prison. Every day, the scientists in white suits would poke and cut, inject strange chemicals, and watch her like she was just an experiment. A soft hiss filled the air as the metal door to the lab slid open. Dr. Orris walked in, his thin, gray fingers tapping a tablet. His yellow eyes flickered toward Zyra, uninterested, uncaring. "She's stable," he muttered to an assistant. "Increase the serum dose. We need to push her DNA further." Zyra clenched her fists. She hated the serum. Every time they gave it to her, she felt her body twist, her bones ache, her mind burn. But no one cared. They didn't ask if she wanted this. They never did. The assistant injected a needle into her arm. Pain burned through her veins, and her vision blurred. She wanted to scream, but she had no strength left. She was tired of this, tired of the pain, tired of being owned. But what choice did she have? No one had ever saved her before. Until today. The break-in. Suddenly, the alarms blared. The red emergency lights flashed, and a robotic voice echoed through the lab. "Unauthorized entry detected. Security breach in Sector 12. The scientists froze. Dr. Orris frowned. "What now?" Then, boom. The far wall exploded, sending a wave of fire and smoke across the room. Glass tubes shattered, spilling alien bodies onto the ground. Scientists screamed and ran as the fire spread. Through the thick smoke, a shadow appeared. A tall figure stepped forward, dressed in black armor, a blaster in each hand. His face was hidden by a dark helmet, but Zyra could see his eyes through the visor. Human eyes. She had seen humans before, but they were always the ones buying slaves, treating them like objects. This one was different. He moved fast, taking down guards in seconds. His blasters fired precise shots, knocking out the security turrets before they could lock onto him. He dodged a scientist who tried to run and slammed him into a console, knocking him out cold. Zyra's heart pounded. Who was he? And why was he here? Dr. Orris stumbled back, pressing a button on his tablet. "No, stop him. We can't let him take the specimen." The human turned toward Zyra, his visor scanning her. Then, without a word, he raised his blaster and shot the metal cuffs holding her down. The locks clicked open. Zyra gasped. She was free. Her weak body struggled to move, but before she could fall, the human caught her arm. "You're coming with me," he said. His voice was deep, firm. "Can you run?" She blinked at him in shock. Why was a human helping her? Dr. Orris screamed, pressing another button. A red light flashed on Zyra's arm. Her DNA brand activating. Security alert. Property X09 attempting escape. The human cursed under his breath. "We gotta go. Now." He lifted Zyra into his arms and ran. The chase. As soon as they stepped into the hallway, a group of robotic guards appeared, their metal bodies covered in glowing weapons. "Return the specimen," one of them ordered. The human didn't stop. He spun, firing shots as he sprinted forward. Zyra held onto him tightly, her vision still spinning from the serum. He was fighting for her. The thought made her chest tighten. No one had ever fought for her before. The robots fired, but the human dodged every blast, moving like he had done this 100 times before. He kicked open a door leading to the outside and rushed toward a small dark ship parked in the distance. Behind them, alarms continued to scream. A single thought burned in Zura's mind as she stared at the endless sky above. Was this real? Was she really escaping? The human ran up the ship's ramp and hit a button. The doors slammed shut, and the engines roared to life. As the ship lifted off the ground, Zura's DNA scanner flickered red, trying to call her back to the lab. But she wasn't going back. She turned to the human, her voice weak but clear. "Who are you?" The human removed his helmet. He had a rough, scarred face, dark hair, and sharp blue eyes filled with something she had never seen before. Not greed, not cruelty, but defiance. "Name's Derek," he said, strapping himself into the pilot's chair. "And I don't believe in slaves." The ship blasted into hyperspace. For the first time in her life, Zura was no longer a prisoner. But was she truly free? The human who defied the law. The cold metal of the spaceship rattled as it shot through hyperspace, leaving the industrial slave world behind. Zura lay on a small cot, her body weak, her mind still spinning from the serum forced into her veins back in Lab 47. She was free. At least, that's what it seemed like. Her glowing blue DNA brand was still there, burned into her very cells. She wasn't just a person. She was property. And the galaxy never let property go so easily. Her vision was blurry, but she could hear footsteps. Heavy boots against the metal floor. A chair scraped, and a voice spoke. "You awake?" Zura's eyes fluttered open. The man sat across from her, his face now uncovered. His short, dark hair was messy, his strong jaw covered in a rough layer of stubble. A thin scar ran down the left side of his cheek, but his sharp blue eyes were what stood out the most. They weren't the cold, calculating eyes of the scientists. They weren't the cruel eyes of the slave buyers. They held something else, something strange. "Where?" Zura's voice came out weak, her throat dry. "Where am I?" "The Black Star." The man leaned back, arms crossed. "My ship." Zura blinked, trying to sit up, but her muscles ached. She looked down at her arm, the glowing barcode-like symbols still pulsing faintly beneath her skin. Her heart sank. Even if she was off that planet, even if she had escaped that lab, the galaxy still saw her as a thing, a branded thing. She clenched her fists, feeling a sudden wave of anger. Was this human really any different? Her voice was sharper this time. "You took me. Why?" The man let out a short breath, shaking his head. "Didn't take you. Rescued you. There's a difference." Zura let out a dry laugh, though it held no humor. "Rescued?" Her violet eyes narrowed. "Then let me go." The man sighed. "If I let you go right now, you'll be dead in a day." Zura frowned. "What?" He pointed at her arm. "That brand. It's not just a mark. It's a tracking signature, coded into your DNA. You leave this ship, every bounty hunter, every slaver in the system will see exactly where you are." Her chest tightened. So it was true. She wasn't free. She was just in another cage. "I don't even know your name," Zura said, voice low. The man leaned forward slightly. "Derek," he said simply. "And you?" She hesitated. No one had ever asked her before. Not as if she mattered. "Zura." Derek nodded. "All right, Zura. Here's the deal. I don't believe in slaves. Never have. Never will. That's why I broke into that lab." Zura watched him carefully. "Then why did you help me?" Derek's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, then back at her. "Because someone once helped me." She frowned, confused, but before she could ask anything more, a sharp beep echoed from the cockpit. Derek cursed under his breath and stood up, moving toward the control panel. Zura sat up slowly, watching as he pressed a few buttons. A small hologram flickered to life in the air, a transmission from the Galactic Authority. A robotic voice spoke. Attention. The fugitive asset designated as X09 has been stolen from authorized ownership. A bounty of 1 million credits has been placed for its return. If you have information, report immediately. Zura's stomach dropped. 1 million credits. Her breath came out shaky. They put a bounty on me. Derek didn't respond. He was staring at the transmission with a dark expression. His fingers tightened into a fist before he shut it off. Zura felt cold. I see now, she said softly. You can turn me in. Collect the reward. 1 million credits. That's enough to buy a whole fleet. Derek turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. She expected him to say something, maybe deny it, maybe try to convince her otherwise. Instead, he reached into his belt, pulled out his blaster, and fired. The shot wasn't aimed at her. It hit the control panel next to him. The screen fried instantly, sparks flying as the ship's communication system went completely dark. Zura stared, stunned. Derek holstered his weapon and sighed. There. Now I can't turn you in. Zura didn't know what to say. She had spent her whole life in chains. Every person she had ever met saw her as a thing. A tool to be used, a resource to be sold. And now here was this human, who just destroyed his own chance at a fortune. For her. For a moment, she almost couldn't breathe. Why? She whispered. Derek ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. Because I already told you. I don't believe in slaves. Silence filled the ship. Zura didn't trust humans. She had no reason to. But she wanted to believe him. For the first time in her life, she wanted to believe someone cared. But belief was dangerous. Derek turned back to the controls. We'll be at our next stop soon. I know someone who might be able to erase that brand from your DNA. Zura's eyes widened. Erase it? Derek nodded. Yeah, but it's not gonna be easy. And if we're caught? He shook his head. Well, let's just say I've pissed off a lot of powerful people before. But this time, his blue eyes locked onto hers. This time, I'm betting on you. Zura felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But hope could be dangerous too. She didn't know if she could trust Derek. But for now, she had no other choice. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to believe in him. Escape through the stars. The black star tore through hyperspace, the blue-white tunnel of energy stretching endlessly ahead. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence inside. Zura sat in the co-pilot's seat, her violet fingers curled tightly around the edges of the console. The moment felt unreal. She had spent her entire life locked away, experimented on, treated like a thing. And now she was flying through the stars. But freedom still felt like an illusion. She glanced at Derek, the human who had risked everything to break her out of that lab. He was at the main controls, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the data screen. His fingers moved over the switches and buttons with practiced ease. He looked calm, but Zura could see the tension in his jaw. He wasn't calm. He was planning something. She crossed her arms. Where are we going? Derek didn't look at her. A place called Outpost 9. Zura frowned. She had heard that name before. Isn't that a black market hub? Derek smirked. The best one in this sector. Her stomach twisted. She knew what that meant. You're selling me, she said coldly. Derek's hands tightened on the controls, and he finally looked at her, annoyed. Seriously. Zura didn't answer. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Listen, I just shot my own ship's comms to keep your bounty from being tracked. If I wanted to sell you, I'd be a lot richer right now. Zura stayed silent. She wanted to believe him, but years of captivity had taught her that trust was a fool's game. Derek shook his head. We're going to Outpost 9 because I know someone there. A black market scientist. If anyone can erase that DNA brand off you, it's him. Zura's heart skipped a beat. Erase her brand. erase the code that marked her as property. If it worked, she wouldn't be a slave anymore. She swallowed. And if it doesn't work? Derek's smirk faded. Then we run. His words were casual, but there was something deeper in them. A promise. He wasn't going to let them take her back. Zira wasn't sure how to feel about that. But before she could think about it more, the ship shuddered violently. The alarm screamed. Derek cursed and slammed his hands onto the controls. The holographic display flashed red, showing a pursuit lock. Something had just yanked them out of hyperspace. "What's happening?" Zira asked, gripping the console. Derek's jaw clenched. Trouble. Through the front window, the swirling blue of hyperspace was gone, replaced by the vast emptiness of space, and just ahead of them, blocking their path, a Dominion hunter ship. The massive warship was painted in deep black, its hull lined with red lights that glowed like hungry eyes. A slave-hunting vessel. Zira's stomach turned to ice. Derek tapped rapidly on the control panel, his expression dark. "They must have caught a trace of your DNA signature before I fry the comms." Zira's heart pounded. They were coming for her. Derek's fingers hovered over the ship's thrusters. "Hold on." Before Zira could ask what he meant, the Black Star spun hard, engines roaring as Derek threw it into a sudden dive. The Dominion ship fired. Bright red plasma streaked past them, barely missing the hull. The ship rattled violently, the impact of the near hit throwing Zira out of her seat. Derek growled, "Get on the weapons system. Now." Zira didn't hesitate. She scrambled back to the gunner's controls, her hands shaking as she gripped the targeting screen. She had never done this before. She had never even held a weapon. But something inside her refused to go back. She locked onto the Dominion ship's left engine thruster and fired. A burst of blue plasma shot from the Black Star's cannons, slamming into the enemy's shields. The force rippled through the air, shaking their pursuers. Derek grinned. Not bad. The Dominion ship fired again, this time locking onto them with a tractor beam. A blue energy net began to spread across space, stretching toward them like a massive hand, ready to grab the Black Star and pull them in. Zira's breath caught. "They're trying to take us in." Derek's eyes narrowed. Not happening. He slammed a switch. The ship suddenly lurched forward, twisting in an impossible spiral. Zira barely held onto her seat as they narrowly avoided the energy net. Derek hit another button, and the ship's stealth drive activated. The Black Star vanished. For a split second, they were nothing. Just a ghost in the stars. Zira's pulse pounded in her ears as they drifted, silent, hiding in the shadow of a nearby asteroid. The Dominion ship paused. Its red lights scanned the area, its sensors reaching out, searching. But there was nothing to find. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, the warship turned and drifted away, disappearing into the void. Zira exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath the entire time. Derek grinned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "And that is how you survive a Dominion pursuit." Zira stared at him. "You planned that?" He smirked. "Nah, I just made it up as I went." Zira shook her head, but a tiny, reluctant smile tugged at her lips. For the first time in her life, she had fought back. And for the first time in her life, she had won. Derek turned the ship back toward their course, the blackness of space stretching endlessly ahead of them. Their destination was still Outpost 9, and if things were already this bad, she had a feeling the real danger hadn't even begun yet. The bounty on her DNA. The neon glow of Outpost 9 flickered like a dying star against the darkness of space. It was a floating city of criminals, smugglers, bounty hunters, and those who lived in the shadows of the galaxy. The Black Star drifted toward one of the docking stations, its hull still bearing the scars of the Dominion pursuit. Derek guided the ship with ease, his fingers gliding over the controls. Zira sat beside him, silent, her eyes scanning the spaceport with wary caution. She had never been anywhere like this before. Outpost 9 wasn't like the cold, sterile halls of Lab 47. It was alive, chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerous. Derek leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "All right, we're here." He turned his head toward her. "Time to lose that brand." Zyra looked down at her arm. The glowing barcode-like symbols pulsed faintly under her violet skin. They weren't just a mark. They were a chain. A reminder that, no matter how far she ran, she was still claimed. But not for much longer. She met Derek's gaze and nodded. "Let's do it." A city of shadows. The docking bay smelled of oil, rust, and desperation. Alien mechanics worked on battered ships, sparks flying as they welded broken hulls. Others sat in dark corners, whispering over deals, exchanging weapons and stolen technology. Derek led the way, moving through the crowd with a confidence that made people step aside. Zyra followed close behind, pulling the hood of her borrowed cloak over her head. She could feel the eyes on her. Even though she was hidden, she knew she was being watched. Derek stopped in front of a dark alleyway. A neon sign flickered above a rusted metal door, the words barely legible in the alien language. "CYREX. No TUBESTIONS. No REFUNDS." Derek smirked. "This is the place." Zyra frowned. "Doesn't exactly inspire confidence." Derek knocked. A metal panel slid open, revealing a pair of mechanical eyes. A robotic voice crackled through the speaker. "State your business." Derek crossed his arms. "Tell Cyrex it's Derek, and I brought a high-value problem." A long pause. Then, with a loud hiss, the door unlocked. The hacker who could erase the past. The inside of the shop was a mess of wires, tech scraps, and holoscreens. A single figure sat at a cluttered desk, typing furiously into a console. Cyrex wasn't human. His metallic body was thin, sleek, with a head that resembled a bird's skull. His fingers were long and sharp, clicking against the keys at an inhuman speed. Without looking up, he spoke in a dry, robotic voice. "Derek, you're still alive. Unfortunate." Derek grinned. "Good to see you too, Cyrex." Zyra studied the strange mechanical hacker. He was unlike anything she had ever seen. Part machine, part genius, all trouble. Cyrex finally turned his glowing yellow eyes toward her. He tilted his head. "Ah, the girl with the million-credit DNA." Zyra stiffened. Derek stepped forward. "We need the brand erased. Can you do it?" Cyrex chuckled. "Of course I can. The question is, how much are you willing to pay?" Derek reached into his belt, pulling out a small silver chip. "This should cover it." Cyrex took the chip, scanning it with his finger. His yellow eyes flickered. This is only half." Derek clenched his jaw. "You'll get the rest after it's done." Cyrex let out a mechanical laugh. "You think I trust you? I'm the one doing the impossible here. Erasing a Dominion brand from someone's genetic code. That's not just hacking a database, Derek. That's rewriting a living being." Zyra felt her stomach twist. Rewriting. She had been experimented on before. She didn't want to be someone's experiment again. But what choice did she have? Cyrex leaned closer to her, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Are you ready for this, girl?" Zyra inhaled sharply. "I don't want to be owned." Cyrex nodded. "Good answer." He pointed to a metallic chair with long robotic arms hanging from the ceiling. A dozen needles, scanners, and laser tools gleamed in the dim light. "Sit down, and try not to scream. The price of freedom." Zyra gritted her teeth as the machines came to life. The robotic arms whirred, lowering toward her. Tiny needles pierced her skin, sending jolts of data surging through her nervous system. Her body shook as Cyrex's console filled with lines of glowing code, her DNA unfolding like a digital map. She gasped as she felt something changing inside her. Derek stood by the wall, arms crossed, watching. His usual smirk was gone. He looked Worried, Cyrex's fingers flew across the console. I'm overriding the Dominion's genetic code locks. If they find out, they'll... The door exploded. A blast of heat and smoke rocketed through the room. Derek grabbed his gun in an instant, shielding Zyra as the dust cleared. Silhouettes stepped through the smoke. Bounty hunters. One of them, a massive alien with 4 arms, grinned. Look what we have here. A runaway slave. And a fool who thought he could hide her. Zyra's brand was still glowing. The process wasn't finished. Derek cursed. Can you finish the job? Cyrex's fingers moved like lightning. I need time. The bounty hunters opened fire. Derek grabbed Zyra, shoving her behind cover. Bullets and plasma rained down on the shop, shattering screens and sending sparks flying. Zyra's mind raced. She could feel her DNA shifting, her body changing, the brand fighting the erasure. If she didn't finish the process, she'd never be free. But if they didn't fight back, they'd never survive. Derek tossed her a blaster. Can you shoot? Zyra gripped the weapon, heart pounding. She had never held a gun before, but she had spent her entire life running. She wasn't going to run anymore. She stood up, aimed, and fired. The battle for her freedom had just begun. The last option, erase her brand. A firefight for freedom. The shop exploded with chaos. Zyra ducked behind a pile of broken screens as blaster fire ripped through the air. Sparks rained down, and smoke filled her lungs. Her hands trembled around the blaster Derek had thrown her. She had never held a weapon before. She had never fought before. But if she didn't fight now, she would never be free. Derek moved like a shadow, his twin blasters firing with deadly precision. One bounty hunter fell, a shot to the shoulder sending him sprawling. Another lunged forward, but Derek slammed the butt of his gun into the alien's jaw, knocking him out cold. Cyrex, still at his console, worked furiously. The mechanical hacker's fingers flew over the holographic keys. The process isn't done yet. Cyrex snapped. I need 5 more minutes. We don't have 5 minutes. Derek shouted back. Zyra's pulse pounded. They were outnumbered. More bounty hunters were pouring in through the broken doorway. If they didn't finish this now, she'd be dragged back to a Dominion lab. Back into chains. She clenched the blaster tighter. No, not again. A bounty hunter, a reptilian alien with glowing yellow eyes, charged toward her, a curved blade in his hands. Zyra reacted without thinking. She raised the blaster and fired. The energy bolt hit the hunter in the leg. He stumbled, hissing in pain. Zyra fired again, this time hitting his chest. He collapsed with a heavy thud. Her hands shook. Her breathing was ragged. She had never shot anyone before. But if she hadn't, she would have been dead. Derek's voice snapped her back to reality. Nice shot, but keep moving. Zyra turned, her heart still hammering. More bounty hunters flooded into the shop, blasters raised. Derek gritted his teeth. Cyrex, if you're gonna finish, finish now. The hacker's robotic fingers moved at lightning speed. Hold them off. The brand is still resisting my override. Zyra's eyes flicked to the holoscreen behind Cyrex. Her DNA sequence was displayed in glowing lines of alien code, shifting, rewriting, but something was fighting against the change. Then she saw it. A hidden failsafe. A last layer of Dominion control buried in her genetic data. A programmed command that wouldn't allow the brand to be erased. If the code wasn't broken manually, it would always regenerate. Zyra's breath caught in her throat. She knew what that meant. Cyrex could hack it. He could override it. But only if she let him. She turned to Derek, her voice urgent. The brand has a failsafe. It's built into me. Derek frowned. Meaning? Her pulse quickened. If I want it gone, I have to let the rewrite happen completely. Derek's eyes widened. He understood immediately. If the process finished, it wouldn't just erase her brand. It would erase everything tied to it. That included parts of her DNA, She didn't know what would change. She didn't know if she would even be the same person when it was over. It could kill her, or it could set her free. Zira met Derek's gaze. Do it. Derek hesitated. Zira, I'd rather die free, she whispered, than live as a slave. Derek's jaw clenched. Then he nodded. Cyrex, he barked. Do it. Full rewrite. The hacker's yellow eyes flickered. You sure about this, kid? Zira exhaled. Yes. Cyrex didn't hesitate. He pressed a single key. A pulse of energy shot through Zira's body. She gasped as every nerve ignited with white-hot pain. Her vision blurred. Her bones felt like they were vibrating. Her DNA was being rewritten, torn apart, restructured. She collapsed, her mind spiraling into darkness. She felt like she was dying. And maybe in some way, she was. The storm inside. Her consciousness drifted. Memories flashed. The cold steel table of the Dominion labs. The burning pain of the branding process. The countless days, locked away, waiting for someone, anyone, to care. Then she saw Derek, smirking, handing her a blaster, calling her by her name. Not a number, not an asset. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her, and for the first time in her life, she had fought back. Zira felt herself changing, her DNA shifting, something breaking, something new awakening. And then, rebirth. The deep gasp tore from her lungs. Her eyes snapped open. She was lying on the ground. Smoke filled the room. The scent of burned circuits and blood filled the air. She blinked rapidly, trying to sit up. Her body felt different. Lighter, stronger, free. Derek knelt beside her. Zira. Her vision cleared. She looked at him and saw the astonishment in his face. She frowned. What? He reached out, touching her arm. Her skin, her violet skin, was no longer glowing. The brand was gone. No scars, no marks. Her DNA was her own. Zira's heart pounded. She lifted her hands, staring at them, as if seeing them for the first time. I'm free. Derek grinned. Yeah, you are. Cyrex's voice crackled from the wrecked console. Congratulations, kid. You're no longer Dominion property. A wave of emotion crashed over Zira. She had spent her entire life in chains. And now, for the first time ever, she belonged to no one. But there was no time to celebrate. Derek's expression darkened. He grabbed her wrist. We have to go. Zira blinked. What? Why? Derek pointed to the broken holoscreen. The Dominion had sent a signal before the bounty hunters attacked. They knew she was here, and they were coming. Zira took a deep breath. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding anymore. For the first time, she was herself. She looked at Derek. Then let's fight. Breaking the chains. The countdown to war. Outpost 9's neon lights flickered wildly, alarms blaring across the docking district. The Dominion had found them. Through the cracked window of Cyrex's shop, Zira could see them coming, armored warships descending like predators from the sky, their dark hulls lined with glowing red insignias. The Dominion wasn't sending bounty hunters this time. They were sending an army. Derek cursed under his breath. They're not taking chances. They want you dead or in chains. Zira's pulse pounded. Not anymore. She flexed her fingers, still feeling the lingering sensation of her DNA rewriting itself. Something inside her felt different. Her movements were sharper, quicker, stronger. The brand was gone. She was no longer Dominion property. But they didn't care. Derek loaded his blasters. We have two options. We run, or we fight. Zira clenched her fists. She had spent her whole life running. She wasn't going to run anymore. She grabbed a blaster from one of the fallen bounty hunters, checking its charge. She had never been trained to fight. No Dominion scientist had ever taught her to hold a weapon. but she had learned in the fire of battle. She met Derek's eyes. "We fight." Derek's lips curled into a sharp grin. "That's what I like to hear." He turned to Cyrex. "How fast can you wipe this place if they get their hands on your data?" Cyrex waved him off, already at work. "Relax, meatbag. I don't keep data." He tapped a button, and the entire room lit up with self-destruct warnings. "In 3 minutes, this place will be nothing but smoke and regrets." Zara tightened her grip on the blaster. "Then let's make sure we're not here when it blows." Derek grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the exit. "Stay close, don't hesitate to shoot. And whatever happens, don't let them take you." Zara nodded, steeling herself. "I won't." Then they ran. The gauntlet. The moment they stepped out, the Dominion soldiers opened fire. Red plasma bolts screamed through the air, slamming into metal walls, shattering neon signs, sending debris flying. The streets of Outpost 9 erupted into chaos. Derek moved like a blur, firing both blasters, dropping enemy after enemy with deadly precision. Zara's instincts kicked in. She ducked, rolled, fired. Her shot hit a soldier in the shoulder, knocking him back. Another one rushed at her. She pivoted, using her smaller frame to slide under his reach, firing a point-blank blast into his chest. He dropped. Her hands trembled for half a second. Then she forced herself to move. No time for hesitation. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for freedom. Derek barked orders. "Left side. 3 incoming. Cover me." Zara spun, firing at the advancing soldiers. 2 shots hit their mark, but the third enemy was too fast. He lunged at her, swinging a shock baton. Zara barely dodged, feeling the electricity crackle just inches from her skin. The soldier snarled. "You think you're free, girl?" Zara narrowed her eyes. She knew that voice. She had seen his face before, in Lab 47. He had been one of the Dominion enforcers stationed at the facility, one of the ones who had watched her suffer, and he had enjoyed it. Something inside her snapped. She wasn't a test subject anymore. She wasn't a prisoner. She was Zara, and she was done being afraid. The moment he lunged again, she sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and Salam. She twisted his arm and threw him into the nearest wall within human speed. The soldier's eyes widened in shock. "What?" Zara punched him in the face, hard. He slumped, unconscious. Derek had been watching. He raised an eyebrow. "That was impressive." Zara exhaled, her heartbeat wild. She had never moved like that before. The rewrite. It hadn't just erased her brand. It had changed her. She had strength she never had before. She had speed she never trained for. She had power. Zara met Derek's gaze, her breath unsteady. "We need to go. Now." Derek nodded. "Ship's 2 blocks up. We get there. We're home free." But Zara had a feeling it wouldn't be that easy. And she was right. Because the moment they reached the docking bay, they saw it. The Dominion commander, standing in front of the Black Star, flanked by heavily armed soldiers, was a tall figure in sleek, obsidian-black armor. His helmet bore the golden sigil of the Dominion elite, but Zara didn't need to see his face to know who he was. High Commander Vale, her former captor, the one who had ordered her branding, the one who had ensured she was born into chains. He stepped forward, his voice smooth as silk, but sharp as a blade. "Zara, my dear, you've come so far." Zara's hands clenched into fists. "I'm not yours anymore." Vale tilted his head. "Oh, and yet, here you are, running, hiding, a frightened little experiment who doesn't understand what she's become." Derek raised his blasters. "We're leaving." Vale didn't even look at him. "No, you're not." He lifted a hand, and his soldiers raised their weapons. Derek gritted his teeth. Outnumbered, Zara took a step forward. "No," her voice was steady, strong. Val's cold eyes flicked toward her. "No, I'm not running," she said, raising her blaster. "Not anymore." For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't an asset. She was free. And if the Dominion wanted her back, they'd have to kill her first. Derek smirked. "Well, guess we're fighting after all." The Dominion soldiers aimed their weapons. Zyra's pulse slowed. Her vision sharpened. Then, the battle began. A new identity, a new future. The final battle. The docking bay shook with the force of war. Zyra barely dodged as a plasma bolt seared past her, hitting the metal floor with a loud explosion. Smoke and sparks filled the air as Dominion soldiers stormed forward, their weapons trained on her and Derek. And standing in the center of it all was High Commander Vale. Zyra's heart pounded, but she didn't feel fear. Not anymore. She had spent her whole life being owned, being controlled. That ended today. Val's cold, golden eyes studied her as he slowly stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. "You don't even know what you are, do you?" he said, his voice smooth as ever. "That's the problem with broken things. They think they can fix themselves." Zyra raised her blaster, aiming directly at his head. "I'm not broken," she said. "Steady. Stronger." Vale smirked. "Oh, but you are. You were made to be controlled. And now, without your brand, you're unstable." The rewrite didn't just erase your mark. It changed you. Zyra's grip tightened. She knew he was trying to shake her, to plant a seed of doubt. But she wasn't that frightened girl in the lab anymore. Derek took a step forward, guns at the ready. "All right, enough of the villain monologue. How about we skip to the part where we kill you?" Vale sighed. Then he moved. Too fast. Before Zyra could react, he dashed forward in a blur of motion, grabbing her by the throat and lifting her off the ground. Pain exploded through her body. His strength was inhuman. Zyra gasped, kicking, struggling, but his grip was like iron. Derek fired, but Vale twisted, using Zyra as a shield. The plasma bolts missed by inches. "Look at you," Vale murmured, tightening his grip. "You thought you were free. You thought you could escape what you were made to be." Zyra felt something dark stir inside her, a heat in her blood, a rush of power. Something new, something dangerous. Her brand was gone, but her DNA had been rewritten. Vale had been right. She wasn't the same anymore. Her fingers burned with energy. Instinct took over. She gripped Val's wrist, and his armor sizzled. His eyes widened. What? A shockwave burst from Zyra's body, blasting him backward. Vale crashed into a pile of cargo crates, his armor sparking where her hands had touched him. His soldiers hesitated, staring in shock. Zyra landed on her feet, breathing hard. Her hands were still glowing. Derek blinked. What the hell was that? Zyra didn't know. She had never done anything like that before. She looked down at her fingers, the energy fading, but the feeling remained. Vale groaned, pushing himself up. "Ah, now I see." Zyra's pulse quickened. "See what?" Vale wiped the blood from his mouth. He was smiling. "You weren't just an experiment, Zyra," he said, standing. "You were a prototype." Derek frowned. "That sounds bad." Val's golden eyes gleamed. The Dominion wasn't just modifying your DNA. They were evolving it. You were meant to be a weapon, a soldier, the first of a new breed. Zyra's breath caught. "No," she shook her head. "You're lying." Vale chuckled. "Am I? Look at yourself. You feel it, don't you? The power humming under your skin." Zyra did feel it, but that didn't mean she belonged to him. She stepped forward, weapon raised. "I don't care what I was meant to be," she said, her voice sharp as steel. "I decide who I am." Vale sighed. "A shame. You could have been perfect." He raised a hand. His own armor crackled with energy. "But this time, Zyra was ready. She moved faster than she ever had before, dodging his attack, closing the distance. Vale swung at her. She caught his fist midair. His eyes widened in shock. Zyra smirked. Not bad. But I'm better. She twisted his arm, using his own momentum to flip him over her shoulder. Vale slammed into the ground. Derek fired, keeping the other soldiers back. Zyra, we need to go. Now. Zyra kicked Val's weapon away and turned to run toward the Black Star. Val's voice echoed behind her. This isn't over, Zyra. You can't escape what you are. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She wasn't running from her past. She was running toward her future. The stars await. The moment they boarded the Black Star, Derek punched the thrusters. The ship roared to life, lifting off the platform as Dominion soldiers scrambled to stop them. Plasma fire rained down, but the shields held. Then, they shot into hyperspace. Silence filled the cockpit. Zyra exhaled, slumping back into her seat. Derek sat across from her, watching her carefully. So, she looked at him. He smirked. You have superpowers now. Zyra rolled her eyes. I don't know what I have. Derek leaned back, hands behind his head. Well, whatever it is, I'm glad you're on my side. Zyra looked out the window. The endless stretch of space glowed before her, a galaxy full of possibilities. For the first time, she wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't a slave. She wasn't a weapon. She was herself, and she had an entire universe to explore. She turned to Derek, a small smirk on her lips. So, where to next? Derek grinned. Anywhere you want, kid. The Black Star soared through the void, disappearing into the unknown. A new future awaited, and Zyra was ready for it.